I need your clothes, your boots, and your motorcycle.
So many of my road trips have started just like that. Welcome. If you're new here, my name's Kevin. I'm the host at MCrider. I release a weekly video to help make you a better rider. We focus on skills and road strategy in our weekly Friday videos. If you support us on Patreon, you get access to the field guide and the forums where we're having discussions on a lot of other motorcycle related topics. So go to mcrider.com/support and you can learn how to support the channel and get access to the field guide and the forums. While Arnold and I often start our road trips like we showed at the opening of this, there are probably 5 things that you need to think about before you start out on your next road trip. And this week on MCrider, we're going to talk about 5 things that you probably need to think about before you head out on a multi-day trip on your motorcycle. So one of the first things you need to consider is, do you have the right motorcycle? Now, I'm a believer that you can tour on just about any motorcycle, but some are better at it than others. There's a reason why Honda Goldwings are big and heavy, why they have a whole lot of storage, and why they're particular favorites of people who like to go on multi-day trips, because they have a lot of amenities already set up for it. Now, most bikes can be set up so that they're more touring friendly, but some are better at it than others. Let's just be honest about it. Some bikes are better at touring than others. Now, the first time that I went on a multi-day trip, this is kind of what it looked like. So that's a Ninja 650R, and I'm not saying that you can't tour on any motorcycle that you've got. If there's a will, there's a way. There's just some bikes that are better at it than others. And no matter what bike you've got, you want to make sure that your bike is mechanically sound. So if you're a mechanic, you want to go through that yourself. You want to make sure the bike's in good shape. Your chain and sprockets are in good shape. You've got fresh oil. The tires have enough tread or enough wear left on them to get you through the trip. And if you're not a mechanic, you want to find somebody trusted in your area that'll look over the bike for you. You just want to make sure that the bike's in good riding condition before you head out, because the last thing you want to do is to have a breakdown when you're out on a multi-day trip. You also want to make sure that the bike that you've got is something that you can be comfortable on for multi-day. Now, there's a huge difference in riding a motorcycle around the block or riding it around town as opposed to riding it 3, 4, maybe 500 miles a day, day after day. Now, when I first got my Tenere, I had only had it about a week when I went out on it for the first time. It was pretty well set up for touring. So one of the things that I learned after a few days on that bike was I did not like that seat at all. So I even found a dealership in Tennessee where I tried to find an aftermarket seat for it while I was out on that trip with no luck. But as soon as I got home, that's the first thing I did was I found a different seat for it. So you want to make sure that you can ride the bike, you can be comfortable on it, and you can put in multiple days in a row traveling at the distance that you've determined to travel each day. So the second thing you need to consider now that you've got your bike is you need to know what the fuel range is on it. Why is that important? Well, a lot of riders, when they go out on a trip, you tend to avoid the highways. You like to take the back roads. And depending on where you're riding, some of those back roads, even the major highways in some areas, the space or the distance between gas stations can be pretty extreme. Some bikes only have about a 100-mile range on it, and some areas of the country, that's about the distance between fuel stops, maybe even a little bit longer in some areas. When I was riding a Honda Valkyrie, it was a fuel-injected, or not a fuel-injected bike, it was a carbureted bike. So I knew about 120 miles it was kicking into reserve, and then I knew once I flipped it over to reserve, I had about 1.5 gallons of fuel left to get to the next stop. I was riding through New Mexico, and I guess I was daydreaming. I went through a small town, didn't even think to check the odometer to see how many miles I had ridden. I got about 25 miles outside of town, and I hit reserve. And I hit reserve just as I came up on a sign that said it was about 55 miles to the next fuel stop. So I had pulled over to the side of the road, and I remember thinking in my head, okay, I've got 55 miles. I just hit reserve. I've got 1.5 gallons of fuel in this thing. Man, I don't want to push this the last mile to get it to the gas station. So my choice was turn around, ride back 20 miles and fill up, continue on my journey, or push it and see if I could get that last 55 miles before I hit complete empty. Well, I played it safe. I turned around and went back 20 miles and filled it up. So you want to take your fuel range into consideration when you're out on a bike. Now, most bikes nowadays are fuel injected, so you don't have to worry about, hitting reserve and that kind of stuff, but you do have to keep an eye on that fuel gauge, and you do have to know what the approximate range is on your motorcycle. Now, a lot of guys will carry some extra fuel. There's small gas cans that you carry on the motorcycle that will give you, a gallon or 1.5 gallons of emergency fuel. And that's not a bad idea either if you're out riding in some remote areas. A lot of people choose to do that as well. The next thing you want to consider before you head out on a multi-day ride is what will the weather be like where you're planning on riding. Now, my trip to Colorado, I started out in Texas where it was hot, rode through New Mexico where it seemed even hotter, and then as I got into Colorado and the mountains, temperature began to drop. So there was quite a variance in temperatures that I faced on that one single trip, and the way that you can deal with that best on a motorcycle is having layers available. So instead of having a big heavy coat for cold temperature and something lighter for warmer temperatures, it's better to have something that has zippers on it. My climb jacket's got zippers that I can open and close, and then it's big enough so that I can put layers underneath it to help block the wind out and to help keep me warmer whenever it's cool. Another thing that you want to prepare for is rain, so having a rain jacket and pants that goes over your riding gear is hugely beneficial. And what a lot of people don't think about is that's an additional layer. So I've been on a completely summer day, sunny day rather, where the temperatures have dropped down, and I've put rain gear on because that's an added layer that I could put on over my riding gear, and it helps block the wind out and will keep you much warmer. So you probably want to have rain gear with you to begin with, but that can also be an additional layer to help keep the wind out if you reach into some colder temperatures on your ride. The fourth thing you want to consider is how many miles a day can you ride? So as you're planning your trip out, you want to look at the map and you want to approximate about how many miles you want to travel a day. Now, if all you've ever ridden is, 50 miles, if you consider that a long trip, then you get out on a extended road trip and you plan, well, I'm going to ride 500 miles a day. Doing that day after day becomes really taxing, especially if all you've ever done is ridden 50 miles a day or in a day. You don't really know, what your stamina is or how you can do that day after day. So you want to plan something that you know that you can deal with and that's not going to get you too exhausted getting on the motorcycle and riding that many miles day after day. The longest that I've ever ridden on a motorcycle in one day was a little over 700 miles. That was on that Ninja 650R that I showed you the picture of earlier on one of my early road trips. And I did that in one day, but I can tell you that next day I was pretty worn out. So 500 miles on a road trip's a pretty aggressive day, especially if you're new at it. I'd say if you're new at it, maybe 250 to 300 would be a better range, and that way you can be a little more comfortable to get back on the bike the next day and continue on your journey. But you don't want to be too aggressive in your route planning and saying, well, I can do 500 miles a day when you've never really done that, and it becomes more difficult to do that day after day. So just plan conservatively, and if you're new at touring or new at road trips, 250 to 300 miles per day is a pretty good day to do that, 3 or 4 days in a row. The fifth thing you want to look at is, do you have the right gear? Now, just my word of advice is, if you're planning on doing a multi-day trip, don't go out and buy a new helmet and jacket and test it out on your road trip, because it becomes a lot more difficult to continue on the trip if you got something that doesn't fit right. So if you're going to get a new helmet and jacket, you want to have ridden on it multiple times. You want to make sure that it's comfortable and it's something that you can live with for multiple days out on the bike. The further that you get away from home, for me, the more important protective gear becomes. Now, when I ride around in DFW, and I know some people are going to get on me about this, but I don't wear riding pants when I'm riding around DFW. And I know I would be better protected if I did, but just the hassle of putting riding pants on and off to ride 5 miles to the gym is not something that I do. But when I go out on a road trip and I know I'm going to be away from home, I put on riding pants and I wear those. And the further I get away from home, the more conservative a rider I become, because I know that I'm relying more upon myself, and I can't pick up that cell phone and call for somebody to come help me or to come pick me up. So the further I get away from home, the more conservative I get, and that includes the way that I ride and the gear that I choose to wear when I'm further away from home on the trip. Having the right gear can not only protect you in a crash, but it can also help you ride longer. And a lot of people don't consider that, but if you've got gear that doesn't fit right, you've got something that's flapping in the wind, riding across town, that's not that big of a deal. If you're putting 400 miles per day, something flapping in the wind or something that annoys you like that becomes a small annoyance. Riding around town becomes a lot bigger problem as you're having to deal with that all day. So you want to make sure that the gear fits you right, that you're comfortable with it, and that's also going to help you ride longer and get more miles in during the day and be more comfortable when you get off the bike at the end of the day. Just about anybody can be tough for a single day wearing a helmet that doesn't feel quite right, or a jacket that's binding, doesn't give you room to move your shoulders around. But dealing with that day after day begins to compound itself. So you want to make sure that your gear's tested, that you're comfortable with it, and that it fits you well before you head out on a multi-day tour. I'd love for you guys to leave comments below. Some of you have traveled on motorcycle a whole lot more than I have. So I'd love to hear some of your top tips and things that people need to think about. Leave a comment below, or even better, join us on the forums, and you can find this video on the forums and leave comments there. Tell us your tips for riding on a multi-day trip, for touring on a motorcycle, things that you found that help you. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to learn from your own experience as well. You can join us on the forums, or you can learn more about becoming a forum member and getting access to the field guide at MCrider.com/support. And on that support page, you can also get access to the field guides if you're already a patron of MCrider. So thank you guys. Love to hear your comments. I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say about this and what tips you've got to provide. And until next week, guys, this is Kevin with MCrider, and we'll see you on the road. MCrider is made possible by our friends on Patreon. To learn how to support MCrider, get access to the field guide and the forums, go to MCrider.com/support.